three numbers I have. So we did 6 million in revenue, and round about almost half of it was profit. So it was a good year for us. Do not put in your own money. Bootstrapping sounds great, but you can bootstrap by funds that you win as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Second, don't chase the VC private funding game. Like, go find opportunities.
Are the CEO and co-founder of a food upcycling startup called Breer, which, from what I understand, uses leftover bread and converts that through a fermentation process into some delicious beer, which has really good packaging from what I see on your social media. So I the next time I'm in Hong Kong, I'll definitely try it. So that's the gist of your company. Would you just like to kind of take us through how you exactly do that and what your model there is?
Yeah, absolutely. You understood it perfectly. So we're
Okay.
probably doing a job of communicating what Breer. So exactly like you said, we collect
Yep.
bread, otherwise be unsold surplus, and use it to craft local craft beer. And the process, actually, interestingly enough, is exactly as you would create a normal beer. The only difference in our method is that where normal breweries would use barley as one of the raw materials to enter into beer, we use bread. That's the only replacement that we do. The rest of the process, the rest of the machines, the rest of the brewing timeline all stays the same.
Interesting. That's super interesting. So, I mean, when I think about it, like beer is such a common product. It's one of the most consumed alcohols out there, right? So consumers generally are quite accustomed to the taste of barley being used in beer, right? So when you use bread as opposed to barley, how much does that change the texture or the taste of beer? Is it a lot?
Actually, no, it's a functional replacement. So, to
Okay.
be very technically, like on a pure science fundamentals level, there isn't a
Yeah.
difference because there is barley in bread. The only difference comes into when you have some sort of a flavored bread, sometimes that flavor seeps into the actual
Okay.
product, as well, which
Okay.
is where the kind of bread and butter, if I may, of
Yeah.
Breer comes in, where we formulate specific types of beer, we formulate specific flavors, we think of designated markets to launch things in. I think that's where the magic happens. It's less so in the actual brewing. That's a pretty just fundamental functional replacement.
Awesome. Yeah, and I was actually looking at your product lineup right on your website, and you have a lot, as you mentioned, you have a lot of different kind of flavors. So I think you have hibiscus, and then you have something related to a coffee flavored beer as well, which is pretty interesting to me because I'm a coffee drinker. So what you're saying here is basically your proprietary formulation or your proprietary technology comes in getting those different kind of flavors and textures in the process.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, the first step, to be very honest, is it's very hard to use bread in brewing beer because bread is usually made with lots of preservatives, lots of
Yeah.
butter, lots of
Yeah.
oil, lots of these factors that you can't control when it comes to brewing beer, which is why
Yeah.
barley is so simple because it's literally the main raw material that's needed. It adds nothing else to the beer,
Yeah.
so it's predictable. Bread, on the other hand, is not. And so a lot of the research and development that we as Breer did was actually first figuring out, okay, if we use this type of bread, what does it mean for the beer? How much
Hmm.
more do we need to level set the pH? How much more do we need to ferment it for? Like stuff like that to
Hmm, hmm,
offset
hmm.
the otherwise unpredictable nature of these raw materials. So that's one way. But exactly to your point, the coffee beer, for example, what we do is we collect coffee grounds from cafes. So essentially, when they brew your cup of coffee, they've created this beautiful beverage, but then you've probably seen this in coffee shops. They then go and dump whatever's
Yeah.
left
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
rubbish. And those are grounds, and they actually still pack a lot of coffee flavor. Yes, they can't be used to brew another cup of coffee, but they still do have a lot of that flavor. And so, kind of extending its lifespan and taking it out of going into the landfill, we
Yeah.
reintroduce it into the brewing of beer. And that specific beer is called a stout. It's a dark styled beer. It even actually looks like the color of coffee, so it's a very dark beer, usually drunk in winters. So yeah, the
Hmm.
kind of matching of what style and what flavor is also what we enjoy doing.
Awesome. And that's super interesting. So just on this point, right, you mentioned about how you get coffee from these cafes. Just want to understand your sourcing a bit better.
Mhm.
So are all the raw materials that you use in making your beer, or most of them, upcycled, or is there something that you procure as a separate raw material?
So you're right in saying most of it will be upcycled. That's kind of
Okay.
our ethos and what we do. There are still specific materials that we have to add into the beer that we haven't found a way yet of upcycling. So
Yeah.
that would be things like hops, which are used to flavor beers. That would be things like yeast sometimes, which is what activates
Yeah.
against the sugar that a lot of the bread
Yeah.
has. And so those two, I think, would be the main, and of course, water, but that's just like you
Yeah.
have to water. I mean, in beer, sorry. But yeah,
Yeah.
the main thing that goes into a beer is actually almost 80% of any batch is barley, or
Hmm.
73% specifically. And so all of that 73% that would otherwise be barley, we use upcycled materials for, which would be bread. And then in the event of, say, brewing that coffee beer, we then add in another raw material, which is the coffee grounds, which is also upcycled.
Hmm.
So a minimum of 73% of ingredients have to be or will be upcycled. And then there
Yeah.
might be stuff that we add in that might be upcycled or might not.
And I have so many questions on this, okay? And I have so many directions to go to. But what I want to understand first is it's really interesting how a lot of F&B companies today, or like CPG companies,
Mhm.
they're doing this upcycling or recycling of raw materials into their supply chain and creating actual delicious products out of it. So just last week, I was talking to an entrepreneur in Singapore whose startup basically makes coffee without coffee beans, and
Ah,
they
I
do a
got it. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So shout out to Prefer Coffee.
exactly.
And what they do is they also kind of work with these different chains to procure like soy, procure different things, right? And then they blend that together to get coffee, right? So my question here is, uh, in a category like beer, right?
Mhm.
When you're competing against someone who's making a company who's making beer the traditional process, does upcycling of materials and using these as raw materials impact your margin or increase your margin per SKU versus a traditional brewing method or not?
Actually, it's the other way around. So our margins in terms of what we can sell at increase,
Hmm.
yes, because our cost of production is lower. So how
Okay.
I break it down is, like I said earlier, right, 73% of our batch will be upcycled. We collect all of our materials that are upcycled free of cost. So on a pure like math comparison basis, that means
Yeah.
our production is 73% cheaper than any of the other incumbents. That being said, there is still an element of difference because usually our competitors have their own brewing facility. So Breer doesn't
Hmm.
have a brewing facility. We contract brew. And so baked into the cost that they charge us for brewing in their facilities is this margin that they add on top of whatever their actual operating cost is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have to probably brew at a higher cost, but our raw material cost is much lower. And
Yeah.
so net basis, we are cheaper to produce than incumbent beers.
Yeah.
But that said, we've kind of taken that added benefit and pushed that onto the customer, the consumer, and said, hey, like, we know you're very price sensitive. You are
Yeah.
probably up a Carlsberg and Asahi because it's a
Yeah.
household name and it's probably so mass commercialized that
Yeah.
it's a very affordable cost. So how about we make sure our beers are also relatively more affordably priced, and then you give it a shot because it seems interesting. So that's kind of the level playing we are doing.
Awesome. And so first of all, I have to say, like, you guys are like the smartest garbage men I've ever met. You're basically procuring your raw materials free of cost and then kind of creating that into such a high value product. And I know, reading about this industry, that generally margins in beer are quite high, like gross margins, SKU wise, they're quite high. Am I right to say that for every like can or pint of beer, sometimes the gross margin can be up to 90%? Am I right, or is my information wrong?
It could be. I mean, I would
Hmm.
guess you're looking at a massive behemoth like
Yeah.
Carl,
Yeah.
probably, and we wouldn't
Yeah.
know because at this
Yeah.
point, maximized economies of scale to another
Yeah.
level. So it could
Yeah.
be. I will say we operate in a different market, which I call craft beer. So this
Hmm.
is a little a more niche kind of sub segment of the massive beer market that we're all familiar with. And I think in craft beer brewing, generally costs are higher, and so margins aren't that big.
Hmm.
Because you are, again, like we discussed, doing so many different stock keeping units. So it's not just one specific
Yeah.
flagship that you sell that will do well everywhere, and then you have
Hmm.
volume from it. It's more like, okay, it's seasonal. So like, let's say Mid Autumn Festival is coming in Hong Kong now. You do a mooncake beer. It'll be all the hype in the months of September, maybe even October. But come the next year's March, April, people aren't going to be thinking of the mooncake beer anymore. So it's a lot more seasonal. It's like things come and go. There's volume in months. There's no
Hmm.
volume in. It's a
Yeah.
lot, I guess, scattered than,
Hmm.
say, the sales of something that's so mass commercialized and all year round consumed. So I think in that sense, it is different. It is still a sub segment. So I wish I could say we had 90% margin, because that would be amazing. But
Yeah.
I it's very hard to get 90% margin in a
Yeah.
craft beer
Yeah,
category.
especially because you guys are, you don't have your own manufacturing facility right now, and from what I understand, you're only in one market, which is Hong Kong. So as you
Mhm.
mentioned, right, these big beer companies generally have the massive economies of scale, which they then leverage to milk the margins, but you can't do that at this point. But having said that, if you can share, what is the ballpark range of margin that you make right now on your products?
I think it'd be around about 40 to 50%. This also depends because we as a brand have many different revenue models and channels that we
Yeah.
sell in. So B2B is a big one. It makes up the
Yeah.
bulk of. Another arm is B2B2C. So we sell to e-commerce businesses who then sell ahead directly to consumers. That makes
Okay.
up a little bit of a chunk. And then there's our own B2C methodologies. But B2C in an FMCG industry, or like fast moving goods category, is a lot more limited. It's hard to reach your end customer and get them to
Yeah.
purchase from you directly, even though chances are that that pricing is much better than what you would find in the
Yeah.
market.
Yeah.
But that's found that B2B, B2B2C probably does generally better. And so the margins keep switching thereon, because as
Yeah.
an example, what we sell, or the price point we sell at on our website, is a lot
Yeah.
cheaper than what you would find in, say, a supermarket in Hong Kong that we sell at.
Yeah.
But because
Yeah.
a lot less of attraction for us,
Mm.
or like a lot less of conversion in terms of sales, those
Yeah.
margins never get realized. So even though
Yeah.
potentially those margins might be more or might be less, because you're not paying commission, or there's no
Yeah.
third party payment, you could rake a lot more there, but you get sales from other channels where you probably
Correct.
do more just for the sake of using that platform. So I
Yeah.
will say varied, but I maybe a fair average would be somewhere around 40 to 50%.
Awesome. I mean, using sourcing raw materials at practically zero cost and building a product that has a 40-50% gross margin. And that I think I would presume that that's only an upward trajectory from there as you increase the scale, as you kind of streamline or bulk source your raw materials as well. So there's only an upward trajectory, and that's awesome. You mentioned something very important, which is in FMCG or CPG brands, selling on your own sort of D2C channel versus actually going through the whole traditional distributor, retailer, modern trade route, right? We saw D2C activity pick up a lot during COVID when people weren't going out. And so a lot of these D2C brands sprung up. But now we've seen that their sales have kind of tapered off, right? And I'm of the view that today D2C channels are more of a discovery platform as opposed to a primary sales channel, right? But what are your thoughts on that, and what have you seen from your experience on your own brand?
Yeah, this is a super interesting topic. Honestly, I could spend like hours discussing this back and forth, because I think there are also so many geographical market nuances that sometimes we tend to miss out on. So, as an example, in India, you're exactly right, right? During COVID, there was this massive boom in D2C brands, because that was the best way for you to get to try these products. And I think coincidentally, also shows like Shark Tank started showing up, where you would hear of these products, you wouldn't
Yeah.
care where are these products available, you would go straight to that brand's page and order
Yeah.
directly to get the
Yeah.
thrill of it's a Shark Tank product. So I completely agree with you on that. I will say though, here in Hong Kong, I think the market flipped. It was very different. Before COVID, there was a very big kind of direct purchase drive. So, for example,
Hmm.
you would go to online websites and buy things off of there. Just
Yeah.
before COVID, there was this kind of transition into enjoying products in specific environments. So, as an example, you would go out to a restaurant and buy a pint of beer. You wouldn't see any branding on that pint
Yeah.
because it's in a glass from the restaurant, but you
Yeah.
would be order based on whatever's on the menu. So that would be where the marketing play came in. And then when
Yeah.
COVID, there was this massive shift from exporting product in the form of kegs, which is how tap beer is
Yeah.
consumed, and switched into either bottles or cans. And so suddenly, where other breweries were focused primarily on, say, 80% output in kegs, 20% in bottled or canned format, now they had to make this shift of, okay, maybe 80% here and 20% there.
Hmm.
But because we began during COVID, we saw this shift. And so we got the choice of making the decision first and being
Yeah.
like, oh, actually, people aren't really consuming beer in restaurant anymore because you
Yeah.
can't go to restaurants.
Yeah.
Why don't we start off with bottles and cans? But to
Hmm.
your point again, we started on our website, selling it on our website. But until and unless people feel like it's a quote unquote validated product, in that it hasn't been in supermarkets, it hasn't been in every
Yeah.
convenience store, you
Yeah.
haven't heard that brand again and again and again, you're less likely to try it. So I think that turning point for us came after there was a little bit of media traction. Media picked it up and they were like, what
Hmm.
is this interesting brand and what are they trying to do?
Yeah.
And so we got a lot more exposure there. And it came coupled with us going out there and doing these pop-up booths and kind of just going to every average person and
Yeah.
being like, even if you don't
Yeah.
like beer, this is what we do and this is what it is. So even if they don't necessarily consume it, at least they've heard of it. So I think India, for example, as a market, has
Yeah.
a great benefit in that media plays such a big role. Here in Hong
Yeah.
Kong, because there's a smaller market, you do have to kind of go up front in people's
Yeah.
faces and be like, look, this is what it is. Just
Yeah.
remember and kind of reinforce it until it sticks.
Awesome. That's such an interesting insight. And I actually never thought about, how this variation could play out amongst different countries.
Mm-hmm.
Because you look at D2C and the trends, and you look at numbers on a like a global macro basis. But as you mentioned, right, the nuances are so different depending on the market you're in. So in smaller markets like Singapore or Hong Kong, for example, the way people purchase and the channels through which they purchase are so different from in India today, which is where the consumer landscape is just completely changing. It's going towards more homegrown brands, more
Exactly.
online direct distribution. So that's super interesting. So I want to dig deeper into a lot of things, but just to understand right now, since we're on the products and and sales channel, right, what kind of, and again, could be a ballpark, but what kind of revenue are you doing today? And when you look at it from different sales channels, how is that split?
So I will say B2B makes up a very, very big chunk. Like I would
Yeah.
say 80-85%. I think the remainder of that share is probably split between B2C and B2B2C.
Hmm.
Somewhere, again, very seasonal depending on what's going on in the world, why are people online, that kind of thing. Our revenue, so I don't have our 2024 numbers yet, or I mean, I guess I
Hmm.
have a 2023 numbers I have. So we did 6 million in revenue, and round about almost half of it was profit. So it was a good year for us. I think
Hmm.
2023 really changed the landscape of us figuring out where the moving pieces should be, what
Yeah.
markets are lucrative, what markets maybe don't make so much sense for us. We
Yeah.
also increased our footprint in the sense that we're in so many more stores now. We entered a supermarket in Hong Kong. So that, I think we're also now, because we've had this foundation laid, looking to expand to different countries. So this year our goal is an expansion into India. So myself and my co-founder, both of Indian ethnicity. I've never lived in India, but still very proud Indian, Desi. And so I was like, okay, it'd be such a cool expand and try
Yeah.
something new. So we're actually experimenting with a bunch of mithai and turning the mithai into beer. So there's a lot going on,
Okay. Okay.
lots of new stuff that we're trying. But I think this year it really gave us that foundational stability to then take bigger, larger risks.
Man, if you guys come up with a rasmalai turn to beer, count me in. And I think you'll see a lot of orders being placed on my address. That's so interesting, like turning mithai into beer. And also, that's very interesting because you're not just copy pasting the same idea that you
That
took in Hong Kong. It's like, okay, if you're expanding to India, what do people there care about? Maybe
exactly.
like bread consumption there is not a big thing, but mithai, which stands for Indian sweets, is a big thing there. So this will intrigue people. So let's take a different approach. That's interesting, and that's super interesting again because you are a new brand which is still figuring out their ways, but yet you are willing to take that risk. And I've never seen that before. Usually people do this kind of plug and play approach where it's like, oh, this worked here, let's just kind of scale this, let's see if we can get some production capacity and just try this out. But
Yeah.
that's quite a bold move.
Yeah, I mean, you
Yeah.
hit the nail right. Exactly. I think very early on for myself and my co-founder, we realized that the concept of Breer, and this is why we also don't export out of Hong Kong. Everyone's like, you're already producing in Hong Kong, just export it to India, export it to
Yeah.
Singapore, you're so
Yeah.
close. But it fundamentally, on a product level, doesn't make any sense because it's all about using the products that are wasted in that vicinity, brewing it,
Mm.
creating this homegrown craft story, right? So
Yeah.
tomorrow if I'm to go to India and I'm like, hey, this is beer made from bread in Hong Kong, it's a pineapple bun, like people don't know what pineapple buns are, there's no
Yeah.
no resonation that's happening, people aren't
Yeah.
excited. But like you said, we're doing a gulab jamun beer, so when I tell people, have you had gulab jamun, oh, this is gulab jamun in a beer, people are like, what, gulab jamun in how?
What? I want to
Then
buy this and try now.
hopefully, yeah. So
Yeah.
there of intrigue that I think you need to play on. And this is one of the things that I'm most proud about in my team is myself and my co-founder. I think we are both very not risk averse. Like we are more than happy to take big risks and learn from it quickly than not take the risk and regret it. I think that was the one synergy that the both of us had, which is what has
Yeah.
made us a good working dynamic pair, because we get that. And so even in Hong Kong when we began, right, no one was doing bread beer, which is fine. Like people, you started, if it does well, other people will start doing bread beer. But
Yeah. Yeah.
even nobody was thinking of taking your local sweet delights or sweet
Yeah.
pastries and that
Yeah.
into beer. We actually went as far as doing a pizza crust beer, which no one had ever thought of doing. And so I think
Yeah.
for us, that's our unique selling point, is we really cared about trying new things and we're not scared to disrupt the status quo,
Yeah.
even if it's doing something like an egg tart beer or a curry fish ball beer. Like
Yeah.
we'll try it and
Yeah.
we'll try.
I love that approach, like I just love that approach because that's so bold, and the fact that both of you are aligned on the same page and you're trying to do this. And also what you mentioned, right, like it doesn't make sense to just plug and play your product in a different market, because even from a unit economic basis probably you'll just mess it up completely, right? If you just procure the waste that's created in that country, then your supply chain kind of works out, and that's where your unit economics also work out. So it's I like, yeah, that completely fits like a puzzle, and I think that's a great idea. You guys should do it. And as I mentioned, like once you have the mithai beer, I'm gonna be your first customer.
Done. Sounds good.
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned you did 6 million in revenue, about half of which was profit. How many employees, including the co-founders, do you currently have in Breer?
Yeah, I think you're going to be surprised with this answer. It's actually just myself and my co-founder. We
What?
have we have a bunch of like summer interns. We have a bunch of great individuals who help us out part time, but no one full time. It's just my co-founder and I. We have a very low asset model. So to your earlier point of
Yeah,
it being light, right? We don't own our brewery, so we don't need anyone to. We do have a brewing consultant, but again on a part-time basis, not
yeah.
full-time. We don't have like a delivery van. We work with a delivery and logistics provider, so that's
3PL, 3PL, 4PL provider, right? Yeah,
exactly 3PL provider, so outsource that. So literally, like at this point, the business can run on autopilot. Where Naman and I come in is, the thinking of the new ideas, the brainstorming, the branding, the
yeah,
designing, all that.
yeah,
It's just curation of a brand. Everything else, from a logistics
yeah,
perspective, we've been able to outsource. And I should add here, actually, a lot of people ask us like, how do you do the logistics of collecting these raw materials? Like, sure, it's
yeah,
free if you're paying tons and tons of money
yeah,
to go and the cost. So we created this, call it Jugadu, which is like hack version of a solution where we get volunteers to help us do that. So students who need to do service to graduate university or are just looking to do a good thing while hanging out with their friends, we have an app, they sign up, they go to the bread stores, they collect the bread, they drop it off at breweries, and then it gets brewed into beer. So we really tried to basically cut costs everywhere and wherever we could.
You guys should write a book on running a Jugadu business, as you said, because this is just insane. It's two people full time. So that puts you at 3 million per person, per employee at revenue, and then about 1.5 million for profit per employee. And you've
Mhm.
outsourced basically everything, and even after paying all the overhead costs for the different logistics, to your OEM for brewing, you are left with quite a sizable profit, and I assume free cash flow to kind of take. So that's really smart. And a lot of the times, when you're running like an FMCG outsourced business, and this is from my research, right? You When you kind of take these add-on services from different providers, that really dilutes your profit margins. And also because you're paying so much to the distributors, etc., etc. I couldn't imagine that an FMCG product that is in working in a niche space like upcycling could be doing so well. So really kudos to you guys, and I think you're on a great trajectory here.
Thank you. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah, and now is really when I want to kind of dig into your brain and your personality a bit as a founder, because you're doing such smart stuff, right? So for the people listening, actually, I know Anushka through a competition that we both were part of. It was like a hackathon that happened in Southeast Asia, where you had 2 days to kind of build a prototype of an app for an airline company. And so both of like a couple of teams got into the finals. So it was my team, and then Anushka's team was one of them. And before Anushka's team presented, I was very confident that we had a very good presentation. Then you guys went before us, and I just texted my, because this was during COVID, right? I just texted my team on our Telegram chat. I was like, "Hey, I don't think we're winning this," because you guys just absolutely killed it, right? So I kind of want to dig into this, because I was also like looking at your profile and everything. You have studied in Hong Kong your entire life, am I correct?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, and then you studied computer science or computer engineering.
Yeah. Electronic computer engineering. Yep.
Yeah. And then I was just quickly going through your LinkedIn profile, and you've done a bunch of stuff, right? So you've done like proper like corporate internships in banks. And then you've kind of done another startup from what I saw, and then Breer. So can you just tell us about how this interest in entrepreneurship came about? Was it in college? Was it before that? Just any sort of uh, things you have to share about that.
Yeah, for sure. It's very interesting because honestly, if you asked me maybe 6, 7 years ago if I would ever see myself as a quote unquote entrepreneur or like doing business, I would have said no, because my whole mindset was I want to figure out what industry I like, which is why I've done literally everything from an internship at a high court to an internship in a tech company to being in a financial space. Like I've
Yeah.
tried to specifically find what I think is my calling. And even though I think I've always been very business savvy and that I find businesses interesting, I think growing them is really cool. I just never thought I would do it at this phase of my career. Maybe I thought,
Mm.
like, somewhere down the line, many, many, many years later, I'll meet some people and then we'll be like, okay, let's start a business. But I genuinely didn't think it would happen for me so quickly. And so entrepreneurship was never my calling, or like business was never my
Yeah.
calling. In fact, I took engineering in university because I liked business, but I liked it so much I couldn't pick one specific vertical. So to study business in university, you have to specialize, right? You do accounting, you do finance, you do economics, you do
Yep.
marketing,
Yeah.
management. You don't do everything all together and graduate with
Yeah.
like the overall
Yeah.
condensed business. And so I was like engineering school because if I have a business idea, I should be able to know how to make it. And so engineering
Hmm.
will allow me to do that. And so did that. Really thought I'd graduate, go work for maybe a startup or go work for a company and contribute tech and business know-how. And
Yeah.
then it happened for me kind of out of pure serendipity. Like it was not expected. I genuinely took it like a side project for a very long time. I think for the first 2 years of doing it, it was like a fun hee thing for me on the side. Like you said, it was COVID, people weren't going to class. I didn't really
Yeah.
have assignments. No one was watching over me. No one needed to see if Anushka was attending class or not.
Yeah.
And so let's do this. It's fun. You're learning something on the side. And so did that, and I think eventually there came this pivot where I realized, okay, it's not just a side project anymore, because people are spending their hard-earned money to buy products that we are creating. So the least we can do is we owe it to the company to take it seriously enough, to do it professionally, and really amp it up. And
Yeah.
so I think that very steep learning curve for me to understand how you lead a team. I mean, I've heard of the title CEO and it sounds
Yeah.
great on, but it's
Yeah.
so much stuff. Like, you really need to learn how to build a company. Basically, how I put CEO role into summary is anything and everything your team can't figure out, you need to somehow figure out, which is
Yeah.
such us, because you already have this incredible team. They're literally at
Yeah.
the top of their A game. That's why they're in your
Yeah.
team. And now
Yeah.
there's something they can't figure out, but you need to figure out. So there's a huge amount of
Yeah.
personal growth and learning that happens there. And so that started with me for Breer. And I think as I built Breer, I got more opportunities to use my tech experience and build
Yeah.
solutions. And I truly think tech is the most scalable solution even now. Like, FMCG is great, but being able to scale it globally will take you years. Like, that's why Carlsberg, Heineken, or really any other proper FMCG product is a generational startup or a
Mm-hmm.
generational. It's
Yeah.
taken years for it to build and get to what
Yeah.
it is today for our
Yeah.
generation to see.
Yeah.
But tech, like, look at all the richest people on the Forbes list, right? Like,
Yeah.
90%,
Yeah.
I think, have something to do with tech or have
Yeah.
investments in tech. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
the other company that you were mentioning, it was called Staycay, was something that I did during COVID, and it was entirely tech powered.
Yeah.
Interestingly, it was before ChatGPT and OpenAI, but I'd
Mm.
created a system where essentially people can pick up their phone during COVID and be like, "Hey, I have a group of 4 friends with me.
Yeah.
We are from 7 to 9. We want to do something fun. What can we do?" And you
Mm.
literally like verbatim voice audio it to the phone, and the phone will pick up all of the services that we have on Staycay and say, "Oh, look, this restaurant is available for 4 people seating tonight," or "This kayaking service provider can get you 2 kayaks of 2 people each, and then you can go and explore and stuff like that." So it was basically an experience app during COVID when people couldn't travel anymore. You didn't know what you could and could not do, and it made that experience easy. And so actually my exit from it was pretty quick. There was another company in Hong Kong that wanted to acquire it, so we were like, "Yeah, sounds good, like, you guys take the tech and you guys do it."
Yeah.
And so I was CTO for that. And so there was a lot of learning there as well. I think that was my fastest, like, create something, okay, it's doing well, and then someone takes it and takes it under the
Yeah.
wing, scale
Yeah.
it. But yeah, it was a lot of learning.
Awesome, man. I spent my COVID lockdown period just binge watching shows, and then here you are. You figured out not one but two startups, and then one of them got acquired. So, I mean, when that stake, and I completely agree with what you said, right? Tech being the most scalable. I mean, it's all about distribution today. Like, you create a piece of software here, anybody in the world, provided it's good, will download it and can get on it. Whereas, as you mentioned, an FMCG product, you have to set up the supply chain, you have to set up the manufacturing, you have to get the physical product to them. So I totally agree with that. So this stake a startup that you're talking about, right, when it got acquired, did you like make any sort of money personally from that allowed you to then invest in Breer, or how's it?
No, so Breer happened before Staycay. Staycay happened
Okay.
kind of during Breer. So there wasn't any. I did make money from it. Not that I've gotten it yet. There is money to be made. Let's put it like that.
Okay.
From it that I haven't cashed yet, let's say. But yeah, there was an exit. There was like funds that we made. We were selling
Yeah.
services. Lots of people had heard of us. We had over, I think, 350 service providers in Hong Kong listed on it. So this is anything from restaurants to hotels to small service providers like kayaks or water sports. And we had lots of different themes, and we
Yeah.
had like Valentine's Day section and stuff like that. So yes, it when it did get acquired, I basically said, okay, these are the shares I have. Like, you guys take it from me, and you
Yeah.
buy it off of me for XX amount per share, whatever. So there is money to be made from it. It just hasn't fully finished because the
Okay.
of time was pretty long. It was like, oh, let COVID pass, and then 3-4 years after COVID will come back and da da da. But everything is signed and done, but
Okay.
not necessarily like executed.
Okay, okay. Hope you get your piece of piece of the pie soon. But
Yeah.
that's super interesting, right? So back to Breer. You said you kind of started this as a as a side project, like a hee project, right? But how did you get this idea? Were you a big beer fan, beer consumer, and you know you were into craft beer? And how did you get this idea?
Actually, contrary to popular belief, I don't like beer. This is another very little funny thing people don't realize.
Do what you're passionate about in life, and then you'll succeed.
Yeah, well, it's true. So here's my explanation of why. The whole
Yeah.
reason I Breer is everything I do and I do it so passionately is not because of the end output product. It's because of the fact that I'm able to redirect food from being wasted. That was my calling.
Okay.
So for
Got
me,
it.
it was always about making sure that resources are allocated efficiently. And unfortunately, we live in a world where that's just not the truth. And this can be anywhere, right? Like India is obviously a very massive case study, but
Yeah.
even a small city like Hong Kong, you would think that with not so many stores and with predictably amount of number of people who come in and purchase every day, stores would do a better job of being able to predict supply and demand. But it's hard and you can't. And I think COVID came in and wrecked a lot of those estimations even more,
Yeah.
where people felt like they had some sort of a steady stream going. COVID happened, and then suddenly there's a Monday where everybody wants bread, and then suddenly there's a Tuesday where nobody wants bread.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of distinct change that happened during that period of time, which I think is what exacerbated the scale of the problem for me. So it
Yeah.
started becoming more visual. And so my whole calling has always been in from the first day my team knew that it was about reducing food waste. It was about impact. It was about helping the city that I call home now, and then hopefully scaling that solution to different parts of the world.
Yeah.
My team, there were people who loved beer. So everyone had different motivations, which is,
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
the beauty of entrepreneurship, of building startups together, right? Is everyone comes in for a different reason. Not
Yeah.
everybody will derive shared value from the same thing.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
might have your own intrinsic motivations, which is fine, but this is mine. So I actually couldn't care less for the actual beer. So a lot of people are like, wow, you have access to free beer all the time. And I'm like, sure, but I don't really do anything with it. Like, I don't
Yeah.
like beer. I love our beers and I'll have them, but it's just not my choice of beverage if I was to go out, basically.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. So that's, I mean, that's a pretty strong and valid motivation for kind of getting into this, right? Because I see that there's a lot of food wastage, and I see that happen more in well-to-do countries. I see so much food wastage around me. I'm like, what happens? And actually, myself also, like, I had after COVID, there was this another hackathon, right? So
Mhm.
which my teammates from that same hackathon kind of ended up participating in, and we ended up winning this one actually. And our solution was also to do with food waste, and
Mm.
particularly we were kind of targeting food wastage in schools and university. So that was like kind of the prompt that we had to work on, and it's a huge problem. When I was looking at some of the numbers and the tons of food that is wasted in a single country, it's just crazy. And yeah, so I think that's a really strong motivation for you to do this, and of course I think there's a lot of different categories and ways that this can be expanded as well to kind of maximize the environmental impact. So yeah, that's again very interesting. So you have this idea, you have this really strong motivation, right, that I want to stop food wastage, and you get this idea that beer bread can be used to make beer. Now, how did the early days of this look like? Where did you first create your prototypes? Was it in like your home kitchen? Was it like some lab you rented? How was it?
Yeah, so it was actually my home kitchen because in
Okay.
our team, when we started, I was the only one who had a home in Hong Kong per se. All the other three of them were living on campus. And so we ordered this brewing kit off of Amazon, tried to make it work. The first brew we actually did was because we won a small round of Enactus. I'm sure you've heard of the social
Yeah.
innovation.
Yeah.
So we the on campus round, luckily won some money. It was 10,000 Hong Kong, which at the time I was like, oh my God, five-digit
I'm
number. That's
rich.
yeah, exactly. Like 10,000 is nothing. Like try build anything with 10,000 and it'll run
Yeah.
out. Like
Yeah.
um, so at the time I thought, wow, so much money. Like let's try, let's see what happens.
Yeah.
So bought the brewing kit. Also went to this one brewery in Hong Kong. We were like, we'll pay you some money. We have some money. Like, can you see if you can help us do this bread beer? Did that. The beer tasted terrible, and I'm not just saying that because I don't like beer. Like it genuinely
Yeah.
that it was super salty. It wasn't good. But what we saw is that okay, bread can turn into beer. And I think that's what started this entire journey of exploration into figuring out, how do we scale this? How do we make the beer taste good? How do we make it not salty? What types of breads do we use? Like things like that. So yeah, it was the start of where it all happened, basically.
Yeah, no, the biggest, some of the biggest CPG companies that got acquired or are still growing kind of started like this, right? It was just founders tinkering about some product that they cared about or consumed in their kitchen, in their basement, in their van. And then you see one day it grows and then one day, boom, it gets acquired for like 500, $600 million. So biggest thing starts from like the smallest of actions. So, and look at you right now, between then and now, like now you're at a point where you're infusing flavors, you have this whole
Yeah,
thing figured out, right?
yeah.
But at the start, when you kind of try to do this prototype, it didn't taste good. uh how did you go about kind of defining that? Did was any of your co-founders from a technical background that could help you do that formulation, or did you just hire someone from outside?
It's funny. I think I was the most technical in the team because I was the only one engineering. But even then, like, my engineering had nothing to do with actual beer brewing
Yeah,
engineering.
yeah,
Engineering. So no, there wasn't a lot that we had internally in our team. I will say we did take a lot of time, energy, dedication to learn how to brew online. Again, it was COVID, so it's not like
yeah,
we could have visited a brewery, but on my 13-inch MacBook screen, I would watch as people would put lots and lots of water into massive mash tuns, and then wait 3 weeks, and then you go back
yeah.
on the call and, oh, like, voila, this is what we did last 3 weeks ago, and now it's
Yeah,
that kind of thing. So we did try to do our research and understand the function of brewing and how it all works. But yes, we did then find kind of professionals and ask them for guidance. And we drafted up initial recipes, and we were like, can you just look through this and make sure it makes sense so that we
yeah,
don't end up, because it's a huge investment to try again and again and fail, because you're
yeah,
waiting for 3. So essentially every trial is a month plus of time, which
yeah,
time is an asset as well, right? So you can't just keep wasting it. And so
yeah,
I think we went through that, had some professionals come in and be like, okay, maybe you tweak this, maybe you tweak that.
yeah,
Also, part of the contract brewing arrangement where you pay breweries to brew the product that you're bringing in is you can kind of ask them and be like, does this sound right? Like, can we fix it? Because they also don't want you to blame them and be like, oh, you did it wrong, fix it for us
yeah,
again.
yeah,
So they
yeah,
have this kind of responsibility towards you to be like, okay, what you're doing makes sense. So
yeah.
did a lot of that, did lots and lots of test brews. Eventually we upgraded out of the home brewing setup that I had, which I was very glad, because I feel like my mom was getting very confused what in the kitchen with all this.
What's this smell that keeps coming on?
And you have to leave it for like 3 weeks. So to explain to a parent
Yeah.
they're leaving stuff for 3 weeks in their kitchen, which is their sacred space, is crazy. So
And to explain it to a desi mom,
exactly, yeah,
that hey, and that too, I'm creating alcohol here, and it's
yeah,
gonna smell weird for 3 weeks.
exactly.
Yeah, I
Don't
can
touch.
imagine the trouble.
Yeah, I think more than the alcohol, like, my mom was very still and open minded. She was like, "How do you expect me to not touch something that's in my kitchen for 3 weeks? Like, I'm gonna have to,
Yeah,
no touching, no moving, nothing. Just leave
yeah,
it." I think
yeah,
explaining that was very hard. But yeah, so eventually pivoted out of that. Went to a brewery, and then I think with the more trials you do and the more you learn when you meet people in the industry, you just pick things up. So,
yeah.
so yeah.
Awesome. That's such great dedication, because I mean, there's so many times that people kind of like do these home recipes, and they either give up when they don't see early traction, or they just kind of keep it very small and just do it for themselves. They never really commercialize it.
Yeah,
And for you guys, you were basically working with a product that has a very long production time frame, right? It's not like something that you did today and then you see the results today. You have to wait 3 weeks, and
yeah,
after 3 weeks you could just end up with brown water that can't even
exactly.
be called beer, right? So that's some crazy dedication there. Which brings me to the question: how did you convince your co-founders to join you on this mission, right? Because you had nothing, you just had this wild idea and this motivation that we should stop food waste. How do you convince them? And another question here is, how many co-founders were there at the start?
Yeah, so this is a very funny story too. So actually what happened was, when we first began, we were four of us.
Okay.
Why was the four of us is, I had this one friend that I made in UST. He was in my year. And he was very business oriented and he liked marketing. And
Yeah.
he was essentially my doorway into understanding the innovation ecosystem in India because that's where he was from. So he told me that, oh, there are all these business competitions in India that are very interesting. You just pitch ideas. If your idea gets selected, you fly around India. Then if you make it to the India level, you fly around to other parts of the world. It's lots of fun, lots of free trips, and you make a lot of friends.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's cool. Like, why do we not have dog?
Yeah.
And so I was like, keep a lookout, and if you hear anything, we should go. And so I saw this email that said, oh, Enactus, and I was like, isn't this the thing you were talking about? And he
Yeah.
was like, yeah, yeah, we should go. And so the two of us went to attend the orientation session that happened on campus for it. And while we were there, essentially in Hong Kong, seeing a Desi in the same ecosystem makes you very happy. For me, growing up in Hong Kong, I never really had a lot of Indian Desi friends.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
seeing a fellow brown person would make me super excited. And so in that room, it was the two of us, and there was another guy who was Naman. And so once the orientation was done, we went to each other and we were like, oh, you're brown, we are brown. We should totally form a team together. So then we were like, okay, so that's three. But the people to join in Actus at the time was you needed four people. And so I then literally went through my list of friends and I was like, who's my next closest friend? And I looped him in. And it was funny because that friend and I would always discuss like we should find some $1 million idea and then drop out of uni and live, rich billionaire lives. And so
Yeah.
that was our running joke. And so I literally called him and I was like, hey, remember dropping out of uni and living a rich billionaire life? He was like,
Yeah.
yeah. I was like, let's start with flying around the world. So do you want to join this competition that we are doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
So he was like, okay. So now I was in this team with people who, one guy I was friends with,
Yeah.
one guy I just kind of became friends with, and another guy I was great friends with. But what I didn't think through is that the three of them aren't necessarily friends with each other. And
Okay.
again, like this is Anushka, baby Anushka, thinking it'll just be a fun side project and we'll get to travel
Yeah.
the world. Didn't think through the logistics. I most definitely never in my wildest dreams would have
Yeah.
imagined there would be a business and these would be my business partners and I would have to work with them. It was like
Yeah.
all games. So that's how it began. And now it's just me and Naman, so it's down to two. And I think this journey of going from four to two has taught me so incredibly much in such a short span of time. Like I felt like I needed to grow up 15 years in experience so quickly to handle
Mm-hmm.
some of the conversations that we had to have, to represent to stakeholders, to do all of that. So this was how the team formed. And then I think after the team formed, the next big question was who takes on what role. And so unanimously, the three of them had decided that they feel confident in me being CEO. And again, I
Mm.
just thought, oh, it's just like a title. Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, like
Yeah.
CEO. So that's how I was picked to be CEO. And then the guy who introduced me to the Enactus thing, like I said, he was very passionate about marketing always. That was in fact his major in university too. So he was obviously the CMO. Then we were left with Naman, and Naman is operationally very gifted. And also Naman's backstory, he pitches himself as a serial entrepreneur. He's like from Delhi, quintessential Delhiite, he's
Yeah.
like entrepreneurship runs in my blood. Like I
Blah.
started like that kind of guy.
Yeah.
And he was like the de facto COO, so like everything operations. And then we were left. We needed someone with like more financy stuff. And the fourth guy was coincidentally studying econ and finance at uni, so he became the CFO. So it was
Okay.
so like ad hoc. It was so
Yeah.
basic how we set it all up. And yeah, I think it just tells you a lot that take yourself seriously sometimes. Like even your stupidest, craziest ideas have the potential to become businesses. So
Yeah.
don't discard it and don't do what I did. Really
Yeah.
think it through. I think your team is your biggest asset. And I do think I got really lucky that in that kind of complete, shell of a coincidence, I met Naman, and Naman is still to this day my co-founder. And there's just so much synergy in the way that we work
Yeah.
together. So it all works out in the end.
That's such a interesting story. And when I was researching the company, right, I saw somewhere that I was confused whether there's three co-founders or four co-founders. I
Hmm.
kind of figured that at least one of the co-founders is not involved anymore. But my first reaction of seeing is that, man, this can be tricky, right? Four co-founders can be tricky because I mean, now mostly you see like one or at max two co-founders, three is pushing it, and four is just too much. So this is like one of the questions I really wanted to ask you, and you're right. Like sometimes you, in the spur of the moment, probably you don't think about how the dynamics are going to work, and
Mhm.
how like people are so important, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's like people working with people, and that's all there is. And so, I mean, there can be so many challenges to that. So basically the two other co-founders that you had are no longer involved in the business now, and it's
Hmm.
just you and Naman that are running the show.
Yep.
Okay, understood. And you mentioned that, you kind of took the CEO role in a hee hee moment.
Yeah.
And you were talking earlier about how it's like you get the worst of the problems as a CEO. And I think it was Elon Musk who once said that when you're CEO, it's really not a fun job, because you get all the shittiest problems in the company filtered up to you that really talented people cannot solve. So you're just left with the filtration of all the bad stuff that's happening, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I totally understand what you meant when you said that. Yeah.
And I think,
So
to add that, it's not just the toughest problems that others can't solve, it's also handling team and team dynamics. Like, you're
right.
supposed to be right all the time. And I think what people forget is that the person who's a CEO is also still a person. Like, they still
Yeah.
have to figure it out. In my case, I mean, I can't even compare myself to Elon Musk, because he's leading like the company of the year, like, or the company of the
Yeah.
century, right? Like,
Yeah.
he's creating insane next level stuff, and he has so many people that report to him. So I can
Yeah.
only imagine like a fraction of probably what he has to experience.
Yeah.
But I know like how hard it can be to manage people dynamics, manage, handling conversations, how one speaks. Like, everything at the end of the day is reflected on a company level. And
Hmm.
so it doesn't matter if, you started Breer 2 days ago, 4 years ago. If I'm a client, I'm a client, and I expect you to be treating me professionally. And
Yeah.
that brand resignation needs to be there across the board. So there's so much like of this random stuff that you can't even really put on paper and say this comes in your JD, like this
Yeah.
is in your,
Yeah.
but it's like you just have to do it. Basically, whatever's left, you need to handle and you need to
Yeah.
figure it. I think that's what makes it tricky.
That I sometimes wonder about that, because the whole reason I'm doing this podcast is because I'm interested in like FMCG consumer products,
Mm-hmm.
products that become part of people's lives, right?
Yeah.
And at some point, definitely, I want to consider starting my own. But then I hear all these stories, like when you start this and when you're actually running the show, you don't get to do a lot of the fun stuff a lot of the time. Like you are actually doing a lot of the boring stuff that nobody else wants to touch, and the boring and the difficult stuff that nobody else wants to touch. And that just makes you wonder, hey, will I like it actually? Like I might like the whole initial conceptualization of my brand. I might like the initial marketing, the prototyping, but after that, when it actually comes down to running and managing people, will I like that? And that's just a question that I keep having with myself, but maybe we'll figure out when it comes.
No, you got this. And the thing is, in entrepreneurship, you start something because you're so passionate about it. And this is why there's that ever famous quote, right? 10 startups try, 9 fail, 1 succeeds, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
The reason that happens is because, again, entrepreneurship seems so glamorous. And it can be, and it should be.
Mm.
It's just that those 9 sometimes start doing it for the pursuit of making something big without asking themselves what truly brings them happiness or what
Mm.
truly drives them every day. And I think why, for example, in Breer, like, there have been so many moments where I'm like, man, if Breer just didn't exist, life would be so chill right now. Like, I would feel like I'm sitting on a beach and drinking pina coladas. That's how life would feel, but it
Yeah.
doesn't feel like that. But the reason why I can never get myself to just be like, oh, screw it, like, let me just not do Breer and let me just close it all down, even though it'll solve all those problems, is because I started because I cared so deeply about making that impact. And don't
Mm.
get me wrong, as CEO and as any C-suite person, you will do all the fun stuff too. Like, you get
Yeah.
involved in the branding, you get involved in
Yeah.
the communication. Obviously, when things like nice media happens, it's you and your team that's credited for it. But you will also have to do a lot of the lame, sad stuff that people won't see
Yeah.
you doing. For example, there might be a Friday night where your entire friend group is all out and having a great time, but you need to, I don't know, sort out an Excel sheet because you have an investor or something like
Yeah.
that. Be
Yeah.
anything, but you really need to do what you love, because when you do what you love, those tough moments, you will ride them through. Like, you'll make it
Mm.
worth it somehow. So that was one thing I learned too. If I didn't love what I did at Breer, I would have probably stopped doing it that first time when we made not good tasting beer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so true, and that's a great learning for people watching this and kind of trying or considering or actually currently building brands, that you need to really be bought into that whole idea before you get started, because you can get knee deep quite fast, and then you need that genuine interest in what you're doing to kind of ride those waves, and that's so important, right?
Yeah.
And we're kind of coming towards the end of our podcast, but I just want to come back to something really interesting that you and I were talking about, right, which is the scalability of FMCG businesses today, right? So you
Mm.
mentioned how tech is the most scalable, and it will be the most scalable because of its nature. But we see a lot of outsourced activity happening these days, where there's this whole ecosystem. So if you want delivery, there's party logistics providers. If you want a designer, you can hire someone on Upwork. If you want an outsourced manufacturing facility or a bottler, there's so many of them coming up now. So
Mm-hmm.
do you think the scalability of FMCG businesses will increase with time, in the way that we see these companies that spin up that are super lean, very less employees, and they conquer market by market very fast?
Yeah. I think so, and I hope so, because that's the model Breer has and will continue to follow. Like, we never thought or think to this day that we should ever have our own brewing facility, because
Yeah,
in a way, A, you get to support local businesses, which is the need of the hour, especially
yeah,
post pandemic, the world we live in. But B, you get to let subject matter experts take care and full ownership of specific portions of supply chain, so that you can do what you're best at. So, for example, if I take Breer as a case study, I will never claim I'm a brewer. Like, I will not claim
mm,
that I will be able to brew the best beer every single time. But now, if I outsource this to a facility that's licensed, that has the licensing in place in order to produce food and beverage products, and then I contract people who've been doing this for 40 odd years, they know
yeah,
this in and out, to take a recipe that I've made and make slight tweaks with me on it, of course, bound by the right, documentation and things like that. I'm letting experts handle that part of my business. And then now I can go back to the drawing board and trust that, okay, the beer will come out fine, unless, there's ad hoc, whatever stuff that happens, because that's entrepreneurship. But for the
yeah,
most part, it should all work out. It will be great. It'll be the best version of the beer it can. And then I get it packaged, and now I send it to delivery and storage provider, who again is the best in their game, because that's their subject matter expertise. So they do this every day, day in and day out. You pay them for the service they're providing for everybody else, and now you just pass instructions. So that gives me, as the person who's trying to build this brand, so much time and allowable space to go and pitch this brand to others and do the sales aspect, right? So I could take all of that extra time and set up a pop-up booth and introduce it to people. I could go and
yeah,
meet bars. I could go knock on doors and be like, try this, and sample products out. So I think this is so much of a smarter way of approaching businesses. And it also actually allows businesses to understand whether or not something is doable in a very quick manner. So,
mm,
where, for example, for me to have seen if Bria would work, I might have had to A, set up my own brewery, which is a huge capital investment
yeah,
plus time investment, because you have to get it built. And then don't even get me started on like the right water pH and like the right location, blah blah blah.
yeah,
And now
yeah,
that is done, right? Now you set up this brewery. Then I'm like, okay, let me brew this beer. In order to brew this beer, I have to buy raw materials. You ship the raw material in. Now the beer's brewed. Then I'm like, oh no, I need to get this delivered. So I buy a van. I have to contract a driver, somebody who can take it around. It needs to be a cold storage vehicle, because
yeah,
beer needs to be traveled in cold storage. So then I have to set that up. Okay, now that I've done that, then I go and find stores. So like the time for me to
yeah,
build this and to even see if it would be possible is so long. And then just imagine I do all of this and I go to breweries, I mean, sorry, bars, and they're like, no, not so interested. We don't want to buy. They buy it once and they don't buy. Now you don't
yeah,
have a business model. So now
yeah,
you've tied up a lot of money into building the brewery,
yeah,
more money into getting that van, more
yeah,
money to get the salary of that driver,
yeah,
only to find out this business doesn't work. And now you've put in like your life savings in some cases in an idea
yeah,
that you thought had merit, but you couldn't try out. Vis a
yeah,
vis now, where you outsource it to the subject matter experts, whether your business succeeds or not, they will still exist, right? So you're
yeah,
probably paying much less of a premium in terms of time, just generally, to make that solution happen. create the supply chain, try it out and be like, ah, it works or it doesn't work. And if it works and you feel like, oh, eventually you can scale better if you were to invest in these facilities yourself, then of course that's always going to be an option. But I just
Yeah.
think it's so smarter to test the waters this way and
Yeah.
figure things
Yeah.
out and essentially create a safety net for yourself than to dive
Yeah.
headfirst and not know what you're getting yourself into.
That's such that's such an interesting take on this, and again, a very good learning for people who are trying to kind of create these brands. And as you said, like, let the experts handle these different things while you focus on what really matters, while you focus on the vision. And they say that the best business leaders are really good decision makers. They are
Mm,
not necessarily the most technically sound people, or they're not necessarily the subject matter experts, but they know how to delegate really well,
yeah,
and they know how to make crucial decisions when they matter. And this is just another way of doing that, right? You sacrifice a little bit of margin, you pay a bit more overhead to kind of outsource these different parts, but you free up so much time, which is the most essential commodity you have
yeah,
as a person who's running this business and trying to scale this brand, right?
yeah.
I guess the only question people would have here, and this is a question I've had myself, is that if today I'm a person who wants to kind of create a business in an industry that I know nothing about, right? For example, today, if I'm trying to create a men's skincare brand,
Hmm.
I know nothing about skincare. I only put like moisturizer, sometimes sunscreen, right? So, how do you quickly, from your experience, right? How do you quickly acquire knowledge in a very short span, such that you are then able to approach these outsourced manufacturers, etc., and have a good, meaningful discussion with them, good, productive discussion with them?
Yeah. So it's crazy that you mentioned skincare because I'm actually looking to launch a sustainable skincare line. So let me send you some,
Okay.
try and explore it. But
Yeah.
the one I found, like for me personally, works is in my head, I first figure out what I'm interested in, right? So when you think about Breer, obviously not the beer aspect, but like the fact that I wanted to make a difference with skincare, like
Yeah.
obviously every girl loves their skincare routine. But growing up for me, there was a big focus on like DIYing what I'm using. And this is a huge thing in Indian culture as
Yeah.
well, right?
Yeah.
You make these homemade like
Yeah.
concoctions or nuskas and they just
Yeah.
somehow so bring that part of my culture. So I think the first thing is to identify why you in that space, right? So in this example, men's skincare, like I'm sure there are lots of other men who also put on moisturizer and maybe sunscreen here and there, but what makes you feel so passionate about it that you're like, no, this needs to be me? So I think that would be my first question,
Yeah.
just generally. And then after that, I think research goes such a long way. Obviously desktop research is a great way to start. There are so many, PDFs and stuff you can read online about the
Yeah.
industry, but more than that, once you feel like you have enough of a wrap around all of the available information on the internet, I would cold outreach people who are in that industry. So if you know someone who's building, say for example, a men's skincare brand, perfect, reach out to them. But if
Hmm.
not, just reach out to someone who's building a general skincare brand. It doesn't have to be
Hmm.
specifically for men, but someone who's doing what you want to do in a space that you're interested in, and then ask them questions, like ask them, what was your biggest struggle? So something like this podcast, right? Just have a very
Yeah.
honest conversation. What helped you, what didn't help you, like what do you
Yeah.
wish you had, what do you wish you didn't
Yeah.
have? And you get so much fast forward learning in all of these conversations, because
Yeah.
now, for example, if I put myself in your shoes, you know that when you create a business, you're not supposed to just pick your three closest friends and be like hee hee about
Your
it. Heard
co-founder,
me.
your CTO.
Yeah, exactly. So now
Yeah.
you know, because you had this conversation with me, you
Yeah.
heard how I did it, and now
Yeah.
I'm saying don't do it. So that's accelerated learning for you. So you learn so much in these conversations that may or may not directly impact what you end up doing, but it gives you this thorough experience of the industry. And then I think once you get that interest and you're able to get those conversations going, you just build on foundational aspect. And then the last thing is just try. Like if you have a hunch, or if you feel like, okay, no one's responded to you, nothing has worked out, DIY it. If that means buying a brewing kit and getting it to your home kitchen and doing it there, do
Yeah.
it. If that means literally sitting at home and taking like flowers and putting oil and like trying to turn it into some sort of a mask, do it. Just
Yeah.
try it on a very basic layman level and try to see that it works. And usually
Hmm.
when you've put in all of that effort, people start noticing it. So if you go to someone and you're like, hey, like I tried to DIY this mask and it didn't really work, but I tried, they'll be like, oh, why is this person so excited about this? Let me chat with them and see what's up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it just gives people the validation that you're in it for
Yeah.
real and you're not there to necessarily quote unquote waste time. But I think if you put in all this effort, right, you have to start somewhere. And
Yeah.
chances are very low that you'll start somewhere and hit the jackpot in your first time.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you can keep searching for the treasure, and eventually you might get close to it. There might not be treasure to begin with, which is a whole other story, but at least you took that effort, and in the actual journey, you'll learn so much, which in some ways can be the treasure you're looking for.
Yeah, that's again such a good learning. And I mean, definitely for people looking at this podcast, and as you mentioned, right, my one of my motivations for starting this podcast is also to because I eventually want to create a consumer brand of my own someday. It's like, why don't I talk to all these wonderful people that are already doing it and kind of get pages from their playbook
Mm-hmm.
to see what I can do. And then you've basically told me so many sort of hacks slash jugars today that
Yeah,
I know anyone listening to this podcast will really, really appreciate and really benefit from.
I hope so.
uh, yeah, no, I definitely think so. And it's not that you're just speaking out of thin air, right? You've actually done this stuff, and we can see
Mhm.
it in the growth of your brand and what you're trying to do. And so that's really amazing. And thank you so much for that. Just one last question I have here on this note is, today, if I'm trying to create this lean FMCG brand that you've created, right? So, okay, I know that I have to kind of DIY it myself, speak to outsourced people, speak to people in the industry. What about the money? Right,
Mm.
are there what is your kind of recommendation there? Should I bootstrap it, or should I go for a VC round or a seed funding straight away?
Great question. Again, accelerated learning. So, when I started, I knew that I don't want to put any of my own money because at that time I wasn't earning any of my own money. It was
Yeah.
all money that my parents have earned for so many
Yeah.
years that they're in
Yeah.
me. And so I didn't think it was fair to put in their hard earned money into something that I was again going to do as a hee project. And so
Yeah.
I was, oh, if we're going to put in money into this, it needs to be money that we earn, which is why the first competition we did in Actus, the 10,000 went purely into Breer. So there were two options there. Either you split that four ways, 2,500 each, maybe have a nice dinner that I'll forget about in 6 years, or you put it into something that could or could not work, but at least you tried. So we did the latter, and then obviously it's become what it has become today. So never, ever, ever, if you can, put your own money. How to not put your own money? Today's world, there are so many competitions, so many grants that will give you money free of equity, just
Yeah.
purely on the merit of your idea. And again, it comes down to your hard work, right? How much effort are you willing to put into the deck? How much effort are you willing to put into actual target market research? How much effort are you willing to put into creating a network to make yourself seem credible? So
Yeah.
much so that someone's like, okay, let me take a bet on them. Here's X amount of money. Try and make it happen. So use these opportunities, and it could be locally wherever you're based. So that could be, in your home country, in your larger continent, even. But if not, look for it in other countries because there's no dearth of these opportunities for
Yeah.
sure. So that would be
Yeah.
my first kind of push is don't put in any of your own money, contrary to what all of these great startup stories tell you. Like, I had
Yeah.
$5, I put all of it because I
I
was in
couldn't
COVID.
travel. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, come on, we have to be realistic, right? Those are
Yeah.
great success stories, and but the chances of that happening are really slim. So don't
Yeah.
be that person. Use the
Yeah.
opportunities that there are in this world. So that would be my first. My second would be, don't get caught up in the trap of being in the mindset that I was in, which is that, oh, if you're a startup, you have to go on Shark Tank or you have to go to VCs and pitch for funding. When you get funding, you are giving a portion of your business in exchange for that funding. And I think people
Yeah.
sometimes discount that. So my notion of Shark Tank, because I watched a lot of it, and Silicon Valley and everything, was,
Yeah.
wow, like you get money in the millions and your startup becomes like the next big thing and everyone's talking about it. So I remember very funny or like vividly when Breer started in the first year. I remember telling my team, okay, guys, it's time for us to make a list of VCs and angels that we would want to reach out to, have conversations with. And
Yeah.
so all four of us are like scouring the internet, creating this very detailed Excel, all of the names, what
Yeah.
do they
Yeah.
on, what is their average round size, blah, 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 ticket size. And we went into conversations with so many of them. And I remember going as far as pitching to one venture capital firm that's primarily focused on the Greater Bay Area, China, Hong Kong region, and doing the pitch in Mandarin. Like, I wasn't even speaking my native language. So my co-founders are sitting in the room. They have no idea what I'm saying. And I'm
Yeah.
backing off for like an hour and a half in Mandarin,
Yeah.
asking answering their questions, da da da. And in the end, they messaged me and they were like, okay, we're interested. Like, we'll give you, say, $1 million. And this was a seed round. And then I was like, and they were like, okay, can you tell us what you'll do with it? And then I was thinking, and I was like, actually, I don't know
Why do
what
I
I,
need this? Yeah.
yeah, what do
Yeah.
I do with $1 million? I don't need that much money.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking, and I'm giving away equity. Where does that equity come from? Da 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 da. So after that conversation, I hit a pause on it. And I was like, actually, we don't need any of this. And from that point on, never once has our team brought up the question of funding. Because to be honest, Touchwood, we're in a position where, from a cash standpoint, we're fine. It's strategic investment that we're looking for. And
Mm.
strategic investment is so hard to come by and so hard to find. So, my honest advice would be, don't chase the VC money. They will not always bring added value because they are looking at you as an investment. They've put money into you and they're expecting an ROI. They don't care if your business goes bust tomorrow or does really well tomorrow, because they need to get that ROI. That's the
Yeah.
promise you gave them for taking their money.
Yeah.
So the kind of skin in the game element is very different. And think about it. If you build a company that's worth billions of dollars and you have 100% equity amongst you and your co-founders, that's so much money for you per person.
Yeah.
Then if you had diluted it out to, whatever max level,
Yeah.
but you're not
Yeah.
getting any effort for
Yeah.
the work that you put in.
Yeah.
So I would say these would be my two tidbits. One, use opportunities that exist. Do not put in your own money. Bootstrapping sounds great, but you can bootstrap by funds that you win as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Second, don't chase the VC private funding game. Like, go find opportunities, make sales happen, take grants, use that, but don't give away equity for cheap when it could be worth so much more in the future.
Such an interesting story, and it's so crazy to think that you had $1 million staring in your face, and at that point you're like, hey, let's hit pause, let's take a U-turn, because this is not what we want, this is not where the trajectory that we're going for, and you're saying no to that money. A lot of people, their eyes would start watering when someone's like, hey, I'm going to offer you $1 million, and they're just thinking about the next LinkedIn post where
Yeah,
they're like, hey, I
yeah,
raised $1 million from XX Ventures, and they
yeah,
get that those vanity metrics kind of take over. But
yeah,
it's so crazy to think that you said no in the face of that amount of money,
yeah.
and just decide to go on your own path. And I see so many stories these days where, as you mentioned, right, VCs are kind of, there might be some VCs that are good, that are making strategic investment. Those are very few. Most
Mm-hmm.
VCs today, they really structure the contracts in such a way that it only benefits them. And you are seeing increasing these stories of founders who raised money in the millions, right? They did
Yeah,
one or two rounds, but
sure.
actually when the company liquidated, they came away with nothing because of
Nothing.
how the contracts were structured. So
Exactly.
if you really don't need the money, don't take it. Bootstrap. And as you said, credit. Today we fortunately live in this world that where money is available. If you
Yeah,
have a good idea, if you have a good value add, money is
exactly.
available, and so you should just go for that. And that's
Yeah.
such an amazing takeaway. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you for asking
Yeah.
me that question. Because I wish someone asked me this when we were actually going through this, because then it would have made me think twice. It shouldn't have
Yeah.
gone to the point where we were so deep in the conversation. I was so proud. I was like, I did a pitch for an hour and a half in Mandarin. Like,
Yeah.
we better get money out of this. And to still not get money out of it. But, you think about it now, and I'm like, hey, I didn't take those 1 million, so I wasn't liable to anyone. And today we have so much more than 1 million to play around with. And it's fully to me and my team's discretion on how we use that money. And
Yes.
that is a different kind of power. So you have to chase
Yeah.
that power and not the LinkedIn post
Golden
excitement.
handcuffs. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, let me put this out there and look like a
Yeah.
cool thing.
Yeah, no, that's a great decision, I think. And the fact that you're kind of expanding into a huge market like India, but you're taking this huge risk where you're completely changing your value proposition. You're like, hey, we won't make beer out of bread anymore, we'll make beer
Mhm.
out of mithai. If there was like some big investor who owned a chunk of your company, they would just straight away say no. They would be
Mhm.
like, hey, no, this doesn't make
Play
sense.
safe.
Yeah, they would completely reject that because now they want an ROI, so now they're
Yeah.
risk averse from your company, right?
Yeah.
But you get that freedom to decide where you want to take this because you hold all the reins, and that's
Yeah.
so interesting, and that's such a valuable lesson.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry we're already over time. I know I only booked you for like an hour, but
Oh,
the
all good.
conversation was so interesting that I couldn't help but I just wanted the answers to these questions. And thank you so much for kind of taking out the time today. um I think those are all questions from my end. I could have another 1 2 hour conversation with you on many of the topics, but I think for today, let's end it here.
Sounds
Unless you have some questions for me, and you want to chat
No,
about
I mean,
something else.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for doing your research. I mean, I can
Yeah,
tell you're very passionate about this space. Thank you for giving, opportunities for people to learn from others, but also, like I said, doing the hard work of making it
yeah,
happen. I'm so glad we got to touch base after that
yeah,
hackathon, because in hackathons you don't really actually get to meet with the
yeah,
other
yeah,
teams.
yeah.
You're like siloed into your own team, so it's super cool that we're able to stay connected. And I just know our next conversation is going to be over maybe a rasmalai beer at some
Oh,
point.
awesome.
We'll
Once you
continue
once you launch
that.
that, I think I'm
Yeah,
gonna straight away schedule episode 2
sounds
of
good.
yeah, yeah, yeah.